Hey, English 102, this is Professor Rand back with another video about academic argument, followed up by a little bit about writing in a journalism setting. In here, you'll see my philosophy on academic argument and a little bit into what types of essays we'll be writing in this class and some discussion of what it means to do an argument in a journalism setting. So let's begin. There are three expectations and standards of academic writing. The first thing is to understand what's called the writing context, which is the subject, audience, purpose, and genre. Genre right here will usually be determined for you already before writing the essay. And then we want to understand how the writing context, meaning what we pick to write about, our subject, who we write it for, our audience, and why and how we do it, our purpose, how all that impacts the tone and style. And what is tone and style made up of? What comprises it? Well, diction and syntax, and particularly a certain type of diction and syntax. Diction simply is word choice, and syntax simply is the way you arrange those words that you choose to use in an effective sentence. So it's kind of like a flow chart here. You start off with figuring out what it is you're writing about, who you're writing it for, why and how you're going to do it. Then you want to figure out, okay, based upon that, what tone and what style should I use to approach this? And then when you pick out that tone and style, you need to think about what words and what arrangements of words comprises a good version of that tone and style. This here, once again, is the map of our class. So if you take a look at this, and we're going to start right here, I'm going to show you guys the four different settings that we're going to learn academic argument through. The first is journalism. The second is compromise-based or Rogerian. The third is interpretive. And the fourth is research-based. When we write academic argument, what is it exactly that we do? Well, we obviously need to take a position on an issue that is debatable, on an issue that hasn't necessarily been resolved and that's not factual. And to do that, we have to explore multiple perspectives of that issue. We have to explore the many different sides that are causing that debate. Then we want to analyze and evaluate those perspectives to construct and organize an argument. We want to find supporting evidence that supports that argument and ensure that supporting evidence appeals to an audience's sense of logic or logos, emotions or pathos, and ethics or ethos. Good arguments appeal to all three sides of an audience's psyche. So, for example, when we break down the writing context for subject, we want to say, okay, what are we talking about in academic argument? What do we want to write about? We want to write about a debatable issue. Audience, for who are we writing this academic argument? Well, for multiple sides or a panel of jurors. This means that you want to think of your audience as judging your argument, all right? You maybe want to think of your audience as people from both sides of the argument or even people who are undecided. Again, your goal is to be convincing and to be persuasive. Why and how are we going to do this? Well, we first have to understand the context surrounding the issue. Context is a very important word in this class. Simply is defined as the interrelated conditions in which something exists or occurs. So we have to understand the interrelated conditions in which our issue exists or occurs. What is happening with the subject or the debatable issue that we choose to write about today? And then again, our purpose here is to persuade, which is where making appeals comes in. We want our argument to be convincing, all right? We want it to be able to appeal to the many different sides of human thought. So when we explore multiple perspectives, many times we have to realize that issues will have multiple sides as opposed to the popular two. We may think like, for instance, for political issues, you may have a liberal side or a conservative side or a Democrat or Republican side. But oftentimes with many other issues that are cultural, for instance, that's not the case. There are many multiple sides to it. So in order to be able to kind of comprehend this, we have to understand the difference between what is a subjective opinion and an objective fact. The terms subjective and objective are kind of antonyms here. Subjective is a statement that reflects the speaker's perspective, attitudes, and emotions, and it's unverifiable using concrete facts, meaning it's an opinion. Objective, on the other hand, is a statement that is completely unbiased, detached from personal experience or taste, and verifiable using concrete facts. All of the arguments that we make and the thesis statements that we have and the positions we take are all going to be subjective. We are going to be finding evidence to support our own subjective opinions. So how is it that we can be persuasive and convincing? Well, we have to use some objective evidence and we have to write in an objective manner. We need to sound confident and we need to sound convinced. Right? So this bleeds over into the tone and style you take in academic argument. It needs to be assertive and confident, neither too aggressive nor too passive. All right? We want to understand that opinions are subjective, but we want to write objectively and with confidence. And again, your diction and syntax goes a long way to determine whether the tone is properly assertive. You might want to check out page 99 of Writer's Reference. Look down at the blue box where it has the comparison between too aggressive, too passive, and just assertive enough. It has 3 different thesis statements, and take a look at the diction of the too aggressive and the too passive. Look at the phrases that may not be necessary for a thesis statement. It needs to be a clear and emphatic statement communicating the central idea of your essay. Going back to those statements on page 99, we'll notice that the too aggressive and too passive statements use phrase that isn't necessary. It kind of clouds the true words that you need to communicate. Things such as your subject, what the essay is about, your position, what you think about that subject, and occasionally some reasoning. All of these comprise what is called the central idea of your essay. When it comes to writing in a journalism setting, you're going to want to pick out subjects that have a high degree of newsworthiness or are newsworthy. What comprises newsworthiness? Well, our subject needs to have a degree of timeliness. Is it recent? Again, be sure to pick out topics that occurred no earlier than this decade. Proximity, how relevant is it to your audience? This goes into understanding who your audience is for this. Are you talking about an issue on a local scale, a statewide scale, or a national scale? All of that will determine the issue's relevance to your audience and therefore your proximity. Importance, impact, or consequence. How many people does this impact? Again, very highly tied to being aware of who your audience is. Interest. Does the story have any special human interest? Can an individual person relate to this story or relate to this argument you're about to make? Conflict or controversy. Does it cause conflict or controversy? Editors generally deem conflict more newsworthy than peace. Many times when we see things on the news that we may be considered bad or negative, that's because people are generally more interested in these things that cause conflict. It's an issue that's debatable. That's why our subjects need to be things that may be somewhat controversial here. Last is prominence. Does it pertain to prominent or famous people in our society and culture? Again, much like conflict or controversy, the general population is oftentimes more interested in prominent or famous people and things that happen to them, particularly in our society and culture. So when we give an introduction to academic argument, your introduction should answer, again, 2 things. First, you want to answer the 5W1H, which you may be familiar with. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Obviously, your introduction doesn't need to answer every single one of these. Some answers could be simple, such as when. Well, this issue is happening now. Or where. This issue is happening all over the world, or in the state of Kentucky, or in the United States. So some of these may be a given, but be sure things such as the who and what and the why and how, these important ones, you answer. In your introduction, mention conflict. Talk about the controversy or what debate this issue is stirring up. Be sure to be specific. Be sure to use brevity and avoid what we want to call flowery language. Your intro should be short, succinct, and to the point. You want to use the active voice, meaning you want to be sure the subject in your sentences is performing the action as opposed to the subject receiving the action. You might want to check Writer's Reference, page 175, to look up more examples of the active voice versus the passive voice. Then you want to show awareness again of audience and context. Again, being aware of your audience as well as the context surrounding the issue lends yourself credibility to write about it. And then give your thesis statement, stating your subject, your position on that subject, and occasionally offering some reasoning as to why you hold that position on that subject. Here are some examples of thesis statements for our Essay 1. Our first example states the Academy Awards do not nominate enough people of color for their most prestigious awards. If we look at where the bar is, we notice everything to the left of the bar, right here, consists of our subject, all right? We're talking about the Academy Awards, or the Oscars. Everything following that is our position on this controversy about the Academy Awards. If we take a look at the bottom thesis statement, in the 2016 election cycle, there's too much of a liberal bias in American political media. You might notice that the position comes in the beginning. The position being there's too much liberal bias. Well, we'll ask, what is there too much of a liberal bias in, according to this thesis statement? In American political media. So our subject comes last. This goes to show you that there are many different ways to write a thesis statement. So keep your syntax open.